Lace 'em up, let's start the show. We're digging in with Tripp. 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 We're digging in with Tripp today, yeah.
Well, welcome to another edition of Digging In. We are momentarily going to dig in with Hall of Fame General Manager Jim Rutherford. Cup in Carolina, consecutive cups in a salary cap era in Pittsburgh, and he's still going and going strong. So we look forward to that momentarily with Jim. As we just can't emphasize enough, can you rate and review our show on all of our platforms, audio podcast platforms, on YouTube? Please let us know how we're doing, how we can continue to progress and improve. Ask any and every question. At the end of this show, we will answer a few selected ones as we will always do. So please get as active, interactive as you possibly can with us on those platforms. Jim Rutherford, boy, after a 13-year playing career, what a Hall of Fame building career in the National Hockey League. And we're going to be able to dig in with Jim thanks to our presenting sponsor, the very loyal New Country Auto Group. New Country with elite dealerships in New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Florida, anything from BMW to Mercedes to Ferrari to Smart Car, Maserati, it's across the board. Elite with regards to New Country. I've always been a big fan of family-owned businesses. Jared the Nooch Cantanucci, former hockey player, Hartford grad, part of that Cantanucci family that has put together, in my view, the greatest automotive group in the United States, newcountry.com. So thank you, New Country. And because of them, we are now permitted to dig in with Jim Rutherford. Well, this is going to be a ball. I am pleased to be joined by a guy that has been a mentor to me, a dear, dear friend. He's a Hall of Famer, the great Jim Rutherford. And Jim, I welcome you to Digging In. I always start every show asking how you define digging in. And you've done it on so many different facets. So I guess if you were to pick one category or all categories, how do you define partner digging in?
Well, I'm sure different people are going to define it different ways, of course, but digging into me is all in, whatever it takes to get something done. And if you're ultimately want to reach your goal, that's what you have to do. You have to go all in, not half in or not doubt what you're doing. You have to believe in what you're doing. And even though the critics are saying it's not the right thing to do or it's not going to work, and you believe it, you got to dig in.
Oof. Quality answer to set the tone. And, I'm trying to figure out where to start this. And, as a 3-time Stanley Cup winning general manager, twice with the Pittsburgh Penguins, you just were a week removed from the draft. So can you take me, let's start here. 1969, you go in the first round, the Detroit Red Wings. What do you remember about your entry draft when you were selected?
Well, times were different then in many ways. Of course, we all know that. When I was drafted, the draft wasn't the same as it is now. You didn't attend in person, although it's similar to what we just went through here now by doing the virtual draft. And so I believe the draft was held in the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal. I don't know if the teams attended, but the players didn't. And so the day of the draft, I was waiting for a phone call. And I didn't get a phone call, probably didn't get a phone call for a couple of days after the draft from the Detroit Red Wings, who drafted me in the first round. I was taken 10th overall, which was really high for a goalie in those days. I guess it's still high in these days. And so I was anxious to find out what the results were. So my mom and dad and I drove into Toronto, which is about a 45-minute drive to downtown Toronto, and we waited outside of the Globe and Mail newspaper. And I'm pretty sure that was the first newspaper out. It was the best results we could get. And so anyways, we waited until the paper come out. We grabbed the first paper and read it, and there's the results. I was picked 10th overall by Detroit, and I was excited. We went home, never heard anything from Detroit for a few days. They called and told me they drafted me. They were happy, and they wanted to meet with me. And so they sent their head scout. His name was Donnie Graham. And they sent him to my house. I didn't have an agent at that time. And he said, here's what we want to pay you. And if I remember right, of course, the numbers are a lot lower in those days, but I believe it was $15,000 to play in the NHL, and $7,500 to play in the minors, which was Fort Worth, Texas, and a $5,000 signing bonus. And I didn't even think about it. I just said fine, and I signed. I was just so proud to have the opportunity to go to an NHL camp, and then my playing days, the rest was history.
I can't wait to get into that. But you mentioned your mom and your dad. I was lucky enough to spend a significant time with both of them. What parts of them individually and cumulatively are you most proud are parts of who you are? And when you began playing hockey, JR, I never asked you, were you always a goalie right from the get-go?
Yeah, I was a pretty small guy. And I wanted to play goal, and lived in a small town where we only had about 10 kids on the team. So I didn't have to fight for the job. I was the only goalie. And like I said, we only had a few skaters. And it was great because we got a lot of playing time. And speaking of being small, I mean, my first year in the NHL, I was 5'8", 160 pounds. And that would be very difficult to do in these times.
And your mom and dad?
Yeah, my mom and dad were so good to me, and it was all about family, and it was all about their kids and whatever it took. My dad lived check to check. He worked hard. He did the best he could to provide for us. I don't think I had any new hockey equipment maybe until I was 17 or 18. It was always used equipment, but it worked. Nobody complained about it. I was happy. And we just did the best they could. But I always had that deep love and respect for my parents. But I got to tell you, through this last 6 months where we have all had more time to think about our lives and some of the things that we took for granted. Now, my mom and dad have passed away, but I have even more respect for what they did through difficult times. And, we didn't have any extra things. We didn't go anywhere other than to the rink in the wintertime and the baseball park in the summertime. And our life was centered around sports, and that's what we had. But what they did for me with very limited funds and for my sister is just, I just recognize now that it's really special what they did. It's beyond special, because I know now in tough times, and when I watch people going through this pandemic, you realize what people in your past have done for you.
I remember it was always so much fun to see your mom and dad when we would play games against Florida, and that was a ton of fun. For people that don't know, my dad, God rest his soul, and my mom right off to the left here. She's not going to ask you about the power play today, but you're very close with both of them. So I want to ask you, Jim, because I remember for me, it was my only NHL game. but you came down to the locker room and you shook my hand. You congratulated me. I'll never forget it. What do you remember about your first NHL game?
My first NHL game was in Buffalo, and we lost that game late in the game, and I was very, very disappointed. It was overall I played a good game, but that disappointing loss at the end. And then my first NHL home game was at home against Boston, and my parents got to see both those games, so that was special to me.
You see it, goaltenders now. I mean, I remember at one point the year the Canes won the Stanley Cup. I think Peter Laviolette had he needed an extra goalie, and Anton Babchuk, or it would have been the 2009. I can't remember. Anton Babchuk is ripping one-timers at me, and he had a heavy shot. And the equipment was so good, Jim, you couldn't even feel it, even if it was chin music. When you played, I mean, it was the very definition of a bruise only lasts for a couple weeks, a goal lasts forever. Can you just try to describe the courage both in games and practice to put yourself in harm's way without the equipment of today?
Well, I used to tell guys the best practice that I could have is getting through practice without getting hit. And literally getting hit, even trying to stop shots, because every shot hurt. I mean, my chest protector is probably about the size of this, the weight of this shirt I have on now, and the arm pads and even the leg pads. When you got hit in a certain place in the legs or your skates, I mean, you felt those shots. So in practice, I did the best I could on shots to handle with my gloves. You tried to catch as many as you could or use your blocker, keep it away from your body, or of course, if the puck's going high, you're getting out of the way of it. Okay. And, but I mean, that's how times have changed. The equipment's great now. The goalies are bigger. They're blockers. We were reflex guys and, jumping around, moving around in the net, using our reflexes, our legs and our arms more. And just totally different style, but you had to play that way, just to protect yourself.
I played golf with recently with one of your teammates, and he was speaking about what a great locker room guy you were. And I've always, people that know you have one of the great dry sense of humors in the world, let alone hockey. Mickey Redmond, we spent a good portion of the 18 holes talking about you. Who would you say in your 13-year career, Jimmy, was the most charismatic teammate, storyteller? I know that's a tough question because there were many in those days.
Oh, that's a tough one. But speaking of Mickey Redmond, he was the guy I had to get out of the way of in practice. I mean, he could really rip the puck. He scored 50 goals, so obviously he could shoot it. Be amazing how he could shoot it with today's stick. See some of those guys, what they could do with this equipment. The great storytellers. Well, one of the great storytellers, and I played with him for a couple of years, was Dennis Hull. Funny man, and just a great storyteller. But one of my favorite teammates, my couple of very favorite teammates. One was Alex Delvecchio, who I played with my first year in Detroit. He was just a man's man, a great teammate. And Dave Burrows was a great teammate of mine in Pittsburgh. But, played with a lot of guys. I couldn't pick out one guy that I didn't care for. I liked every guy I played for and really respected what they brought to the team.
It's before we move on to the next chapter, you were working a pretty solid mustache back in those days, if I remember correctly. And I did, when you were my president and general manager, one November, I did Movember. And let's put it this way, my mustache was so unattractive that I think it cost me a relationship. What do you remember about the stash? I was looking at it last night.
Well, it was the 70s and most people had a stash, so it was kind of the going thing. But the fact of the matter, my father had a stash and that was kind of a family thing. But But the real reason for me having a mustache was because I looked so young then. I mean, when I was 20, I looked like I was 13. And so the first chance I had to be so-called hip, with the hippies, I grew the mustache and I looked a little more my age. And then if you take it to the other end of the spectrum, when I finally shaved my mustache, against my mother's wishes, because she thought I looked so much like my father, but it was at a point where, it was white and it made me look older. So I shaved my mustache to make me look younger at the other end of the spectrum. I can't do anything about it now with the age I am, with or without a mustache.
Well, I would have to say that's follically digging in at different times. So, Jim, you retire in the early 80s. Can you take me through the years or the time afterwards before you got back into hockey in Windsor, in step by step, the most important moments, after you retired as a player?
Yeah, I retired as a player partway through the season. It was at a point where I obviously couldn't play anymore, and Detroit wanted me as a third goalie. They had two young goalies come in that year, Greg Steffen and Karata Mikolov, and they just wanted me as insurance. And both young goalies played terrific. They didn't need me as insurance, and so I retired partway through the year. I had people from the automotive business coming to me, wanting to be a manufacturer's rep. I looked at that a little bit. I started with one company, and then CompuWare came to me and asked me if I'd start a specialized goalie school. And in those days, there weren't very many of them. And so I thought, that's fine. They talked about starting this for the first year and getting 20 kids and see where it goes. And so we did. We ended up getting 40 goalies. And Pete Karmanos, the head of CompuWare, he came to the first three practices. He'd come over after the third one, and he said to me, "I really like the way you work. I like your work ethic." And I said, "Thanks," and kind of blew it off, actually, even though he was trying to give me a compliment. And he said, "No, really." He said, "Listen to me." He says, I watch people work. I really like how you work." And I said, "Thanks." So we had a session on Thursday. He didn't come. He came on Friday. It was the Friday of Labor Day. He said, "If you're interested in working for us," he said, "why don't you come and meet me on Tuesday, the day after Labor Day?" I said, "Okay." So in those days, $175,000 was a lot of money. It's a lot of money today, don't get me wrong, but I mean by sports standards, by hockey standards. And that was what I made the last year of playing in the NHL. And so he walked through about my work ethic and getting me started into something new. And he said, "I'd like you to work half in the computer software business in CompuWare and half in the hockey department." And he said, "Be patient with me," because he says, "My goals are bigger than just being in youth hockey. I want to get an OHL franchise. I'd like you to be part of it." And he said, "Together, we'll work together and we'll get an NHL franchise someday." And I said, "Well, that sounds good." And he says, "I want to start you off at $24,000 a year in benefits." And I know in those days that a lot of people would have said, "No, I don't want to do that," based on what I come off of making. And I said, "No, I didn't think about it twice." I said, "Good, fair enough. This is a good opportunity for me." And that's where I started. And, people look at me today like, in my position, I've been a general manager in the NHL almost 30 years, but it didn't just start from the day I ended my NHL career. I went back to the grassroots of hockey, which I would give advice to anybody, and go back to your roots and understand how this game works right from the youth hockey up. And that's what I did. Eventually, it was only a year later, we got the OHL team in Windsor. I became the general manager there. We had some success. We won the OHL championship in '88, I think. We went 12-0 through Ontario, never lost a game. Won every game in the Memorial Cup except the most important one, the last one. And We blew a lead. We were ahead 6-4 late in the game and lost 7-6 in regulation. It was heartbreaking, but at that point, Pete Kermanis said, it's time for you to be the point person and go find an NHL franchise. And it took a few years, but eventually that's where it went. He ended up buying the Hartford Whalers.
Yeah, I want to just ask one question because, during your distinguished OHL tenure in Windsor and then with American expansion, the Detroit Ambassadors, the Junior Red Wings, in Windsor, you two-time executive of the year, my man, and former dig-in guest, your dear friend Paul Maurice, Pete DeBoer. I want to ask a question that I asked them with the Windsor Spitfire ties. What will you, because you brought him to the National Hockey League with you, what will you remember most about the life of profound difference lived by Tom Webster?
Oh, that's a sad story, that we lost him just recently. But Tommy and I started out long before Windsor. When I was with the Red Wing organization, my first year I played in Fort Worth, Texas. That was my first year pro. And Detroit the Red Wings had a great year that year. I think they almost had 100 points and really had a good year. But they made some changes and they decided they were going to trade Roger Crozier. And they traded Roger Crozier to make room for me to move to the Red Wings, and they traded him to Buffalo for Tommy Webster. And Tommy Webster and I were roommates our first year in the NHL. So we have been long time friends. And so when I went to Windsor, I hired Tommy as the coach. And Tommy was tough. He was a demanding coach, but he was a really good coach. He was good for Windsor. He was good for the Spitfires, and my relationship with him has always been very good.
I remember when you hired me as a raw broadcaster in the late 90s that Tom Webster showed me video to help me systematically, Jim. The locating Hartford and making that jump to the National Hockey League, what do you remember most about the Hartford tenure before I go south to Carolina?
Well, I liked Hartford, and they have really great fans. We didn't quite have enough of them, but man, those fans that came there, they were just terrific, and I felt very bad about us having to move out of there. The downside to Hartford, if you look at a downside, is the insurance industry was so big there through the 80s. And then those companies started to merge and they started to leave Hartford. And so the corporate community had really dwindled in Hartford. And then, of course, Hartford sits basically between Boston and New York for all intents and purposes. When we were there, we had games televised by all the sports teams in New York and all the sports teams in Boston. And we were trying to be the team in our home city. And so it was a difficult situation. I believe that if the state had have done more to get a building built quicker, we probably would have taken a shot at making that work a little bit more. But it was tough. We had to be careful with our budget as far as, how good we made the team at that point in time. We competed, we came close to the playoffs, but 3 years in Hartford and not making the playoffs certainly hurt the fact that we couldn't get more people in the building. But for those 12,000 people, 13,000 people that came on a regular basis, you couldn't find better fans.
Well, I was just part of training camp there, but I completely concur. Now you spoke at the top of the show about digging in, being all in. So you make the commitment to go to Raleigh. Now you're not just the general manager, you're the president too. So 2 big time hats. Digging in the 2 Greensboro years, what kept your eyes on the prize? What kept you moving forward? What allowed you to dig in at that incredibly important time to set that first impression in Carolina?
Well, we didn't have a choice. Okay, we had to dig in. Okay, we'd made the commitment. We were going to a very good market. Unfortunately, they didn't have their building. Unfortunately, we didn't have lead time to promote that we were coming. You know, our decision to leave Hartford was after that regular season. I think we had 4 or 5 months to get ready to go and play our first game in a new market, which wasn't even the actual market we were going to be in. We were going to live in Raleigh, play 70 miles away in Greensboro. And it was difficult to get the people in Greensboro attached to the team because they knew we were just passing through. We had the loyal group of people that drove from Raleigh on a regular basis, but man, it was tough. I mean, there were nights that you know, it was almost like we are now. We were in a pandemic and we wanted social distancing in the stands where we'd only have 2,000 or 3,000 people spread out. And but you know, we stuck with it. It was still tough when we got to Raleigh. You know, we were new. We were trying to make an impression. We were trying to build that franchise fan by fan, seat by seat, and be competitive. And so I'm glad we stuck with it. There were some tough years financially there for Pete Kermanis, but we, you know, every 4 or 5 years we figured out a way to contend and go to the conference finals or go to the finals and win a Stanley Cup, which was a remarkable feat, which we will remember forever. But the nice thing about what happened and the investment that Pete Kermanis put into that market and the work that I put into it is now that triangle is so much bigger. They have so many more fans to put in the building and draw from. They've done a really good job with building that team. It started with Ron Francis when I left. He tore it down and he built with draft picks and young players and was patient. He built the foundation for where the franchise is today. And now Don Waddell has made some really nice moves to build the team into a contender, which it should be for a long time. So it makes me very happy to see what's going on in Raleigh with the Hurricanes.
You know, and it's, and Ron Francis is a free agent committed to be there with the Hurricanes in Greensboro, first ballot Hall of Famer. And you, of course, in the Hall. The guy I want to ask you about right now, because you've always been a fearless guy when it comes to trades. The guy I'm going to ask you about, in my opinion, is the Carolina Hurricanes. And you had traded for him in the year 2000. I hope at some point he joins you in the Hall. What do you remember? And because I remember a bump after our game in Philadelphia one night, and we stayed for a long period of time. And I don't know what was going on, Jim, but you eventually traded for Brenda Moore. And it is, without question, by far the most profound transaction, in my opinion, in Hurricanes history. Can you walk me through the things you can tell me? Bobby Clark, same draft year in '69 with you, things leading up to that trade.
Yeah, well, what started it all was a contract dispute with Keith Primo. And so that kept dragging on, and it appeared that it wasn't going to go anywhere. Keith Primo was the type of player that Philadelphia looked for, and they were going hard after him, but they were making offers that didn't make sense for us. And the guy that I wanted was Brenda Moore. And at that time, I believe he had a broken foot or a broken ankle, and he wasn't ready to play. And then the evening that you were speaking about, it was still on the Brenda Moore thing. You know, they were throwing other names around, and good names, by the way, certainly fair trades. But it was all about Rod Brenda Moore, and he still wasn't ready to play. And then I said, well, if he's not ready to play, Primo's not playing for us, so why don't we just go ahead and make this trade? And they were not quite sure. They still wanted, at that point, still wanted to trade him. But they were getting antsy about Primo. And I said, if you're getting Primo at any time, it's Brenda Moore, you're not getting him. And so eventually they said yes. Now, that wasn't an overly popular trade when it first happened in the triangle, because Primo was a good player for us and a popular player. I think he might have been our captain when we traded him. And so anyways, Brenda Moore comes in. He's still hobbled by this foot problem. And, you know, his play wasn't great right off the start. But eventually he got healthy and became the player that we knew he was. He was a leader of the team. And I agree, Rod Brenda Moore is a Hall of Famer. I believe he will be in the Hall of Fame. And one of the top coaches in the league right now. He's jumped into that. That was part of my plan. If I'd have stayed there, that I would have made him a head coach. And but eventually he got there. And back to Ronnie, you know, when we brought Ronnie, traded for Ronnie Francis and brought him in, that was the guy that really gave us the credibility. We had Gary Roberts. He was trying to get his career back on track after a serious injury. But to be able to bring Ron Francis in, he was the guy that gives the Hurricanes the credibility that we needed.
Never forget, right down the street here at the old Joe Louis Arena from where my mom and I are at right now, that beautiful overtime winner in Game 1 of the 2002 Stanley Cup Finals, that Ronnie, boy, did he go upstairs. And I want to stick with Rod just a couple questions, because the things that you maestro behind the scenes with Phil. Okay, so all of the things you did during the lost season in 2004, 2005. But, you know, and you always allow your coaches to make choices, but you clearly pushed to have Rod Brenda Moore become the captain of the Carolina Hurricanes. And I think that is beyond instrumental in what unfolded. Can you maybe take me behind the scenes of that?
Yeah, I don't remember a lot about that. I do remember how adamant I felt that he became the captain, and you know, pushed hard to make sure that happened. But with his leadership and where he was at in his career, it was time for him to do that.
The other thing is just finishing on Rod. This was a great moment on the plane. So, you know, you sit up front and you'd come back and hang out with us, you know, at times. And, you know, I was sitting next to Chuck, Vin Scully, Caden. And Rod was in front of us or something. And Chuck and I were probably up eating. What's new? And you pointed, you looked at Charlie and I, and you pointed to Rod. And I don't know, I think he had just begun as an assistant coach. And you pointed at him and you said to Charlie and I, you said, that guy is going to be a great head coach someday. Never forget it. And I remember I went and told Rod, I said, you know, this is how Jimmy feels. And why did you think that at that very early stage?
Well, his knowledge of the game, the way he handles people, his leadership qualities. You know, he had such great character, but he just had a good feel for his teammates. He had a good feel for the game. He had all the things you need to be a coach. And, you know, he just needed the opportunity, and which he finally got. But you could tell this guy is hockey through and through. That's his whole life. And that's the way he goes about it. He gives 100% at everything he does. And that's why he's been successful as a player and a coach.
Won't forget that. Okay, I'm jumping around here in the Carolina tenure right now, but Paul Maurice, when he was on, he told the story. Okay, 2002. I don't know if you felt this way. First round, but the New Jersey Devils were certainly the most formidable opponent in the Eastern Conference. Okay, and Artur Zerbe Canes had home ice advantage because of the division. Irbe stands on his head in winning the first 2 games at home. And Mo told us that you told him going to game 3 on the road in New Jersey, hey, Paul, it's your choice. You're the coach. But I think I would consider going to Kevin Weeks right now. And, Paul said he waited. He should have, he didn't know how he thought he'd just get crucified for doing it after Archie won 2 home games. But Kevin eventually comes in and wins the series for you. What made you feel that? I mean, that's just flat out feel.
Well, Kevin Weeks won one of the biggest games in Hurricanes history.
No doubt.
It was Game 7 in New Jersey. We won 1-0. Ron Francis scored the goal. And Kevin Weeks was just absolutely terrific. But it was, I think Arturs had been playing a lot. He may have had a little nagging injury or something. And Kevin Weeks had been working. And fundamentally, he was such a good goalie, and he was big. And you could see in practice that he was on his game 100%. And it just seemed that at that time, maybe Arturs could have been a little bit tired, or he could have kept the run going, or it could have been that nagging injury. And what I was saying to Paul is we have another goalie here that's capable and ready to play if you decide to go with that option. And he did. And we had a similar situation here in Pittsburgh when we had Fleury and Murray, and both guys were playing so good, and it was a tough decision for the coach, which guy does he go with. But going back to that series against New Jersey, both those goalies were the difference in getting us through it.
Oh, unbelievable. I mean, the save that Kevin Weeks made on John Madden before Josef Wasicek, God rest his soul, scored the overtime winner there in Game 5. I mean, that's right there on the Mount Rushmore of big wins in Hurricanes history. And hang on, while we're on Kevin Shady 80 Weeks, because we're mutually very close to him, former dig-in guest, let's digress for a second. He says you're calling him from time to time and saying, Weeksy, your style's falling off. I don't know. Patrick Sharp, Anson Carter, what's going on? You got to dial up your game. Why have you never even addressed my style or lack thereof? I'm clearly just not in the same zip code as Shady 80. I guess we can surmise.
Well, look at these guys on NBC Sports. Jonesy too. I mean, I don't know if it was Anson Carter or Sharp or who it was, but these guys are all really got the nice outfits on now. It seems like
even Jonesy. I love Jonesy. You're saying even Jonesy?
Oh, I love Jonesy too, but even Jonesy, I mean, he's even stepped up his game. And I know Weeksy always wants to set the trends and the styles. He's got the new suits going, and I just wanted to remind him that there's other guys that are in his game now and that are competing with him and maybe moving past him. So I got to give him a little jab once in a while. I haven't seen him lately, but I'm sure he'll have the new suits on when the new season comes.
I think he's starting to really trim down because every time I talk to him, he's on a power walk and then eating oatmeal, because for a bit he looked like he was expanding like a blowfish. That's just and boy, he is one of the. Thank you for making that, because that trade, Paul Maurice talked about it in your field. I mean, Shane Willis was playing really well for the Hurricanes, and you made that deal for Kevin Weeks. You certainly don't get anywhere near the Stanley Cup Finals and really scare that Hall of Fame-laden Detroit team had it not been for that acquisition. I want to – actually, you know what? Because I want to ask about the day that you traded for Justin Williams, Danny Markov going to Philly. But, Jim, what would you say – and I'm sure it depends from one transaction to the next. When I say fearless, what is your philosophy? Has it always remained the same in being willing to make a trade? Columbus took a chance when he sailed for America. You're always willing to take that chance. What is your philosophy on the trade market?
Well, you have to get to the point where you realize you have a need at a certain position, and you're at a point where you feel the team need something. They need a new face in the lineup. And so I do my homework. I listen to everybody in the organization. They have their input. I like it when everybody doesn't agree. It goes round and round, a lot of great debate, and then I have to make a decision. But a lot of trades are unpopular at first. Like the Kevin Weeks one was unpopular because of Shane Willis was such a popular person and a good player. But we needed a goalie. We needed another goalie, and I really liked the way Kevin Weeks played, and I always liked him too as a person. And so I went ahead and made the trade. And you got to go with it. And sometimes you're going to be right. You're not going to be right all the time. You're going to get some trades wrong. But the majority of the ones that I've made have been pretty good.
Heck yeah! And I have to tell you, this one I'm going to ask about because I mentioned, Brenda Moore, where the Hurricanes would be without him. You mentioned Ron Francis setting the tone early, giving you credibility. Okay, so I have to tell you, I enjoyed Danny Markov a lot. We might have actually had some good times together. All right. So, and I thought he dug in. I mean, he gave you everything he had every night. So you make a trade to Philadelphia. And then, now I will say Justin Williams, former dig-in guest, he had me at hello the first day I walked into the locker room. But what do you remember about that deal? Because, looking back, that was monstrous.
Well, Philadelphia was in trouble on their blue line at that point. They had so many defensemen hurt, and they were ripe for making a good trade with them. Okay, they were vulnerable at that point in time because they were in such need of a defenseman. And Danny Markov was a good defenseman, and again, I like Danny a lot too. He was an interesting guy. But to have the chance to get a guy like Justin Williams, who was younger, and really just starting to get into his prime, was we had to do it. We just had to do it. And in hindsight, for me, that's the best trade that I've ever made, getting Justin Williams. I know the Brenda Moore one was big. The Stahl one was big. The Jordan Stahl one. It's a long-term contract and different things that people know about. He's an important player for the Hurricanes and always has been. Excuse me. And but when I look back at all these trades and look at trading Danny Markov to bring Justin Williams to the Hurricanes, I think that was the best one.
Wait, I'm jumping, but because I talked to Jordan Stahl last night. He was with Jared. And I told him I was going to be digging in with you today, and it was at his wedding that you made that deal with your future captain, because he wasn't too pumped up about it. I remember seeing the look on Sidney Crosby's face there at the Valhalla in Thunder Bay. We'll get to that later. But what I do want to ask, again, your sense of humor. All right, so you and I happen to be part of the whole entourage that goes up to the guy you took at number 2 in the 2003 draft, Eric Stahl. By the way, a lot of people, would have said maybe you should have taken Nathan Horton, who had a very fine career, but you took Eric. And so Eric decides, and this is how they do things in Thunder Bay, to get married at, I want to say, 10 o'clock in the morning. And then the reception didn't start till 6 at night. So I'm there with you, Paul, Jerry Maguire, Krapelka, and, of course, the great Rick Curran, 2/3 of Eric's agents. John Adams was a goaltender, a dear friend of yours. And we decided, okay, we're going to go into, I think, the lodge there or whatever it was called, the sports bar. And so we're having beers and nachos. And it's the middle of the summer. Slowly but surely, your players are coming in. They're of age. Andrew Ladd, Cam Ward, Eric Cole. They're afraid to booze in front of their general manager. So they go around the corner. And now in comes Mike the Robe Commodore. And he immediately sits down with us and says, and I think ordered a round of shots, Southern Comfort, and maybe 2 Coors Lights each. I guess my question would be, do you actually think about when you're going to show your players your tremendous world-class personality? Is that selective? I mean, what do you remember? Because Kami, I know you loved it, that Kami was comfortable in his own skin and the other guys were afraid to tip a few glasses in front of their GM, and he just sat right down and ordered shots to boot.
Well, that's what made Kami the guy that he was and he is today. I still get a text from him periodically, a guy that I really care for. But the people that I respect the most are the people that are just themselves. And that was him. And I'd have been fine with the rest of the team sitting having a beer with me because, I mean, come on, they're adults. I don't think that they're just drinking water all the time. And we were at a wedding. But you're right. It was fun to watch how guys were being cautious. And then, of course, Kami didn't really care. And he jumped right in there. But what a great guy. There's another guy that played a big role in us winning the cup. Not that he was scoring the big goals, but the role that he played was very important.
All inclusive that, of course, during the lockout, Lowell was split with Carolina in Calgary, and he was playing for Calgary. So I'm guessing that's when you recognize he might be a nice addition. You know, all those things you did, preparing. Okay, we're in free agency right now. Please call me on this. I was talking to Scotty Bowman yesterday, and I said, Scotty, typically speaking, is free agency fool's gold? And he said, well, you know, you typically, in his mind, pay 25% more than you really should. You can handcuff yourself for the future. Now, you did remarkable things in free agency when a salary cap and changes and rules were coming. They were huge in the Hurricanes winning the cup. How would you say typically a Hall of Fame general manager that you are approaches free agency?
Well, you approach it with what your needs are, and you approach free agency in most years knowing that you're going to pay a premium. And I agree with Scotty. I mean, you're gonna pay more than you want, and the biggest thing is you're going to give more term than you want. But at the end of the day, if you don't do it, you don't get the player. And if you don't get the player, you're sitting there during the season, and everybody's saying, "Well, they needed this player. They should have got a certain player to play this position." So my philosophy is you do what it takes to get the player. Now we're in a totally different situation now where we thought we were at one point in time, the cap was going to be 87 million this coming season. Then it was reduced to 84. And then of course, when COVID set in and we got the new CBA, the cap stayed the same at 81.5. And so, you know, now what I look for are good players that have slipped through the cracks, that made a lot of money the year before, but are looking for an opportunity. And that's the way I approached it this year. And I think we got a couple of good players that can help our team in Rodriguez and Jankowski.
I want to round out the Carolina portion and shift into Pittsburgh. Now, this doesn't necessarily fit the bill, but a couple of quick mentions. Because one of the guys that has been around for all three of your cups, Matt Cullen, you notice he was just scratching the surface, you know, during that lost season. Whoa, wow. Was he the first star in Game 7? Ray Whitney, part of Detroit having to reduce their salary, team salary, based on a new cap. Ray Whitney, whoa. I mean, so these are just moves you've made. All right, now I have to ask you this, because this will hopefully seamlessly shift into the Pittsburgh tenure. Brenda Moore, every time he and I walk by the White House, Jim, he's always telling me, I'm like a kid in a candy store asking, because usually the general manager, the captain, the coach, at least a lot of times I think, maybe have a private meeting with the president when you win a Stanley Cup. And I know you were part of one with George W. Bush, who's my favorite president of my lifetime, by the way. So can I ask you, because I looked at the videos last night then of you being with President Obama and President Trump, what do you remember about first we'll go chronologically, President Bush, President Obama, and President Trump, about any private moments as the general manager of those three teams that you could share?
Well, it's an experience of a lifetime. And I loved all three of those presidents when I met them. They were very, very good to good host is the best way to say it. But with President Bush, we had the private meeting. I believe it was Peter Laviolette, Brenda Moore, and myself, and President Bush for about 10 minutes. Dana Perino was the press secretary at the time. And so we talked the natural small talk for a president that didn't know a lot about hockey or our team or the Stanley Cup finals. And it was nice. I mean, he was very personable, and I really enjoyed it. So Dana Perino was coming in and say, Mr. President, 90 seconds. Mr. President, 60 seconds. The countdown to go in and speak to the whole group. And so, Mr. President, let's go. So Peter walked out, she walked out, Rod walked out. I was in the room with President Bush. And I should have started off this story by saying I used to visit the White House with the Secret Service and got to know the person that takes care of the pets. And when we got to the White House that day, he called me out to the back lawn to see the Barney, his President Bush's dog. And so when I was walking out of the room, it was just President Bush and I. Turned around, he had his head down. And I said, President Bush. He said, yeah. I said, you got to put Barney on a diet. I said, you're feeding him way too much. And he really had the shoulders going as he laughs with his shoulders. And he thought that was the best. And so I walked out of the room and we went in. And of course, it's a prepared speech. And he started off the speech by saying, I know how you guys won the cup. You have a very aggressive general manager telling me put my dog on a diet. So anyways, that was a moment of a lifetime for me to be one-on-one with the President of the United States. President Obama is so charismatic and just a really, really cool person. You know, he came in, he went around the room, he shook everybody's hand. You know, the Penguins gave him a golf bag and a round of golf at Oakmont, and you know, he loved that. And he said to Mario, he said, I can't go there and play by myself. I hope you can play with me, Mario. And of course, Mario said yes. And just really enjoyed that visit. And then with President Trump, it was, we were all there. They actually give us a little bit of food that time. We didn't get it the other two times. And we were waiting around in kind of in one of the real beautiful rooms in the White House, and President Trump came in and said, you guys ever been in the Oval Office? He says, come on. I don't know if we're supposed to do this or not, but come on. And so away we go, and everybody got positioned. He was sitting at his desk, and then he got up and he started to speak and talked about, you know, you guys are here because you're winners. And he says, you know, I like to be a winner. And he said, I had this senator that's wanted to play golf with me for a long time. And I just played with him last weekend. And he said, I won because I'm a winner. And he said, I shot 73. And he said it again. He said, a legit 73, he said. And so then he comes back around and he just walks in front of me. I'm standing right beside Mike Sullivan. He walks in front of me. I said, how many holes did you play? Checking to see if his 73 was in 18 holes or not. And he gave me a quick look, and he was ready to say something to me, and he didn't. He just kept on going. But anyways, that's been my experience with presidents. It didn't matter what party they were from. They were just great hosts, and they're special people in their own right.
Those are all unique. Thanks for sharing that, Jim. Couple people you mentioned. Let's start with Mario Lemieux. If there's one particular story or what jumps out at you about maybe what you didn't know about Mario, you know, when you managed against him, and then when you obviously worked with him en route to 2 Stanley Cups, that maybe epitomizes who he is.
Yeah, well, obviously, when you get to know somebody and work with them, you get to know them a lot better. I mean, I wouldn't have come to Pittsburgh if I didn't have the respect for Mario Lemieux that I had. And then when I got here, I got to know Ron Burkle, the other major owner, and of course David Morehouse, who's president. But Mario is probably the most respected gentleman in hockey that I've met, and he understands the game, he understands the business, but he lets everybody do their job. Now, I can call Mario at any time and ask him a question. He takes the time to answer it. He'll always say, this is my opinion, but we hired you for a reason. You have to make the decision. And that is so respectful from a guy like that, where he doesn't push his opinions or his views, but he's always there to support you. He is very, very supportive of his people, and especially of me. And when I stepped down from the Hurricanes, I thought that was going to be enough. And then I got the call from Pittsburgh, and I'm so happy I took this opportunity, not only because I had a chance to win a couple more Stanley Cups to give me the opportunity to go into the Hall of Fame, but to be a part of an organization that's so classy, that's owned and run by Mario and Ron Burkle and David Morehouse.
Right before the Christmas, before the first of those 2 Stanley Cups, consecutive, that I want to get to in a salary cap era, let that marinate. But you ended up making a coaching change, and you bring in Mike Sullivan. Okay, American-born coach. And I'm sitting there thinking, as soon as you did it, because you had the Midas touch when you hired an American-born coach named Peter Laviolette to win the Cup in Carolina. You brought him up from the American Hockey League, your affiliate. During that process, did it actually occur to you in your own mind that, hey, did you see some similarities? Because it would seem like on the surface there were a bunch when you made that call to make him be your guy.
I wasn't overly familiar with Mike Sullivan at first, other than the fact that I watched his career when he coached in Boston in the early stage of his coaching career. And I remember he was kind of on hold as to whether they were bringing him back the following year. And I was on the same flight as him somewhere, and I had never met him before. I introduced myself, and I said, I feel bad for you, Mike. I think you really did a good job in Boston this year, and I hope you get your answer soon that they're bringing you back, which they didn't. And that was really the only time that I had talked to Mike Sullivan. When we were hiring a coach for Wilkes-Barre, we were looking at what type of coach we wanted there. And Jason Botterill was the general manager in Wilkes-Barre, and I told him, find a coach that has NHL experience. Find a coach that at some point in time can come to the Penguins and be the coach. I want to make sure that we have insurance there. And so through the process, Jason Botterill was telling me things about different coaches. He had narrowed it down to 3 guys and told me the different things about them. And I said, Mike Sullivan's our guy. I said, do you agree with me, Jason? He said, yeah. So Jason hired him there, and then got to know him a little bit better, although, not a whole lot better and he got off to a start there where he hadn't lost a game, 12-0, 13-0. And we needed to make a change. And so it was a pretty easy decision, but you're right. He has some similarities to Peter Laviolette. But I would say there's areas that he's quite a bit different in.
How are they different?
I think they're both good communicators with their players. I would, I don't want to say too much about the differences because I don't want it to come out negative, because I got the utmost respect for Peter also. But the way that Sully breaks down an issue with a player, one of my favorite things that Sully does is when he's got an issue with a player and the player is not on the same page as him, he'll have a meeting with him and he'll let that player speak. and then he'll give his opinion, and they'll go back and forth. And then near the end of the meeting, he'll say, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. And you come back and remind me if I don't do it. I'm going to meet you halfway. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't take the strong opinion of you're doing it my way, or he doesn't, or the player doesn't get to take that position either. He says, I'm going to meet you halfway. And then over time, you see how it evolves. And if the player doesn't like it, he can come and see him again, or if he's meeting him halfway. But I like that approach where it's not just, hey, this is the way we do things here, and you have to do it my way, or you're not going to play.
I would have to say that compromise is certainly one of the absolute staples of digging in. That's pretty cool. Very cool. Okay, I never told you this, and this is Tripp's going right down on the sword right now. But, when I made a brilliant decision in a relationship and it didn't go my way, Sidney Crosby, and I was going through a tough time because I had dug in, and he called me with regularity for the better, probably 4 or 5 months with regularity to see how I was doing. He is your captain. Is there a particular story that jumps out at you about Sidney that just screams why this guy is so special and will go down as one of the true greats in the history of the league?
No, there's nothing jumps out at me, because for me, everything that he does is special. And it's not about one thing for him. It's about how he conducts himself personally. He cares about people, how he quietly does things to help people. He's not looking for accolades of special things. You help people in need, and everybody sees what he does as a player, but he's the hardest worker. He's one of the first guys on the ice because he leads by example. When there's an issue with the team as a captain, he doesn't blow it out of proportion. He'll deal with it quietly on a one-on-one basis with a teammate. He'll maybe even go over to their house, and sit with them and talk through it. Most of his communication is through the coach. Mike Sullivan and him communicate on a regular basis. I will meet with him maybe a couple of times a year to get his viewpoint, but his viewpoint comes through the coach. And he's just special. I mean, everything he does, I can't pick out anything that if he was my son, I would say, you should maybe think about doing this different. He's just special in every way. And people ask me about rating the top players and who is the best player in the league. And I'm not so sure it's fair to rate players as number one or number two or number three. I have a group of 5 or 6 guys I think fall into that group. It's the obvious guys, the Lemieux, the Gretzkys, the Orrs, the Howes, that group of guys, Rocket Richard. But I put Sid in that group now, and not to rate them as who's number one. But Sidney Crosby still playing, still has some more things to do in his career. But I think he falls into the group of the all-time greats.
And by the way, just because he does everything right consistently, Jim, I've had access to the fact that, like you, an outstanding world-class closet sense of humor that guy's got. He's got it.
He does.
Okay. God knows when I was your color analyst for so many years, at times you had to be saying, Tripp, will you just land the plane? But I have to ask a couple more questions because these feats have been so fabulous. Winning back-to-back Stanley Cups in a salary cap era. Now, you did different things in those off seasons, within the season, depending on the group. And, if if there's another general manager that, let's say, the Tampa Bay Lightning or, whoever, your good friend Doug Armstrong last year, what would be the things that jump out to you that were most critical to being able to accomplish something that I think will be a carrot that very few people will be able to reach out and grab?
Well, it's goaltending, and at the end of every conversation, whether it's Stanley Cup playoffs or regular season or whatever, goaltending is such an X factor. And in 16, we had a special team. I mean, we were a little bit ahead of the curve on what we're seeing now with the team speed we had, puck possession. I mean, we had the puck most of the games in that run in 16, but the goaltending of Matt Murray was special, and he came up with the saves when we needed it, and that gave our team the confidence to go on the offense that we were a good puck control offensive team. In 17, it was a little bit harder, but it was goaltending again. Fleury in those first two series, he was special. He was the difference in the first two series, and especially getting past Washington. We had to win Washington in Game 7. That was Fleury, very special. And then the coach went back because he won the cup the prior year. And he decided to go back to Murray, and Murray was the difference in those last two series. So a lot of players made contributions. Sidney Crosby had to be Sidney Crosby, and Malkin had to be Malkin, and Letang had to be Letang, and Kessel was a very important player in both those Stanley Cup. Wouldn't have won without Kessel. A guy like Hornquist, and all the players contributed. But at the end of the day, you have to have that goaltending, and that to me was the X factor in winning back-to-back cups, along with the MVP of our team in both years of Sidney Crosby.
Boy, I have to go one step further and ask a follow-up. By the way, quick remark, being the great lefty golfer that you are, I mean, the deal for Phil Kessel, significant off-season. That's like going the way you did it, all in, par 5, you're 265 out, island green, and you just got it done. Okay? Impressive.
Must have been a big downwind if it was 265
Oh,
out. For me.
I've seen what you do with that lefty draw. You just feather it in, land softly. But, and Paul Maurice mentioned this, you complimented Mario Lemieux that he might give you counsel, but you get paid to make the decision. Has it always been in your DNA as a general manager to have a really close working relationship with your coach? But how do you always, because I know a ton of your coaches, always allow that coach to make the decision? You just talked about Mike Sullivan going back to Matt Murray. Has that ever been difficult? Because you always, any day that ends in a Y, allow the coach to make the decision, regardless of what you might advise.
Well, I learned a trait from a good friend of mine, and it's a friend of yours. And when I say her name, everybody's going to good about it. But I learned a lot from Doris Barksdale, and she worked for the Hurricanes, and I met her in Detroit. Eventually brought her on board in the hockey business. But Doris had this unique way of talking to people and letting them answer their own question. And when you would go to Doris with a problem and you'd sit with her and she'd talk to you, you'd figure out after you left that conversation that she didn't give you the answer. You just give yourself the answer. But she had that way of dragging that out of you. And I learned that from her. And what I've learned with dealing with people is that that's the approach I like to take. When we sit and talk about something, I like to give the person the chance to answer their own question. Now, sometimes it doesn't get to that, and you have to maybe give them the answer periodically. But my preference is to sit in a meeting with somebody, let everybody speak, and eventually get to asking them enough questions that they can answer their own questions.
Doris Barksdale, God rest her soul, from the Detroit area, longtime sports psychologist that you brought to Hartford and Carolina. And I'm going to share with you a story that I've never shared with you, despite the close nature of our friendship. One Christmas, and I'm guessing this is, with Doris's influence, as employees, you gave us a framed picture of is it a poem? It starts, "Dear God." Okay.
Yep, it's the poem "Dear God," but it's all in sports terms.
And okay, I was having a really rough moment, Jim. Really rough moment. And I was at my place in Raleigh, and that gave me strength. That gave me strength. I might have said, when that gift came that particular Christmas at the time, I might have said, well, I could have, like Commodore's, when he got the robe, I could have used a barbecue set. What I'm telling you is that gave me strength, my dear friend, with the influence of Doris Barksdale, when I needed it most. Right when I needed it, I just turned to it, and I had never really read it. I thank you for that.
That's a poem I gave to all the players also when we lost our friend Steve Chason.
Yeah.
Now, I can't recite that poem right now, but just a few things in that poem. It's something like, "God, never give me a pitch too hard that I can't handle." Oh, and at the end of it, it's, "When the final inning comes, make sure I don't complain about the outcome, that I've given everything to the game." It's a great poem. I have it up in my house. I'd have had it here and I would have read it to you because I think it's such a great poem for people to hear.
I can tell you that it gave me strength when I needed strength the most, Jim. And Doris also did the same for me. Players went to her. She was an invaluable X factor in all of the success in Carolina. The entire team attended her funeral. And I'm so happy that you brought her up. One or two more quick things. I had the darn good sense, my college roommate and teammate at Harvard, and I don't know what the heck he was thinking when he asked me to stand up in his wedding, but he is the one person in a managerial capacity that has been with you for all three of your Stanley Cups. He's your assistant in Pittsburgh, Jason Karmanis. What makes Jason the talent that he is, and the two of you for so long now work so well and harmoniously together?
Well, unfortunately for Jason, he gets the brunt of my frustrations when I get frustrated, and because he's been with me so long, he's figured out a way to just take the punch and go with it. But aside from that, Jason's a good hockey person, as you said, he played hockey. Unfortunately, he lost his eye and couldn't continue on. But, I think it was really good that he came to Pittsburgh with me because he got away from people thinking that he was only working because it was with the team that his father owned. But he did a lot of good things in Carolina with me. He's really good with contracts. He's good at evaluating players. He just, he's what I need for a guy that works as an assistant general manager. And like I said, he goes with the ups and downs with me, and he's just used to it now. So sometimes it gets a little tough with the frustrations, but he does a very good job. I was glad that he got an interview to be the general manager in Arizona. He deserved that. He deserves to be in the conversation with teams that are looking at assistant GMs now. And he's in a good place in his career.
Well, hey, listen, just going back to Doris told me at one point, because Jim, all the years that you were my boss, you always let me do my job. and you would have come at me, with poignant remarks. Okay, but I remember one. It was in Florida where you weren't on the road with us, and gosh, stupid me. I thought Andrew Raycroft, I thought his glove high was an issue. So I kept just pounding it. Okay, glove high. And he makes a save on Tanabe in overtime. And I knew at that point way too much I had mentioned. I'm like, David, please score, high glove, please score. And of course, he makes the save of the game with his glove. So we go to Florida. And you come up to me in the morning and you go, Tripp, I watched the game in Dallas. I'm going to give you a grade. And I said, what, Jim? He goes, G. And I'm like, now I'm nervous. I'm like, G? What is that? Is that worse than F? And you go, G for goaltending. All you do is talk about goaltending. So I end up calling Doris, and Doris goes to me. She goes, you know what, Tripp? Jim knows how close the two of you are. If he needs to vent, he knows he can vent with the people that he's most close to. And another pearl from Doris. But I will tell you, to this day, and that was many, many years ago, at the top of my game notes, every game, I write goaltending just to make sure, because it's my crutch, not that I played it well, but to talk about it. Every game, I write goaltending at the top of my notes to make sure that I don't talk about it too much.
Well, it's easy for you to talk about. You're a goalie, so it comes natural. But there are other parts of the game.
So, I mean, all these years later, I do that. And, I've mentioned on previous podcasts, because you, two things. When I needed guidance the most, you did it once again in the right way, like you always do. You said, Tripp, I'm going to give you his number. I want you to talk to Harry Neal, and I want you to talk to John Shannon. And because of that, whatever growth was possible there as a broadcaster has certainly been maximized because of your counsel and your advice. So,
well, they're two good ones, and they had good careers, and on broadcasters, I have to say I'm sad to see that Chuck Caton and John Forsen aren't still with the Hurricanes. They were such a big part of growing that sport, and for the people that were there from the start, the building blocks of building the growth of hockey in North Carolina, those guys they're two great broadcasters and people, and that's the one thing that bothers me. Probably the only thing that bothers me about that they aren't with the Hurricanes. But anyways, I'm sure that they're doing fine.
Yeah, I would say that, I would say that you were my boss. I pretty much knew that whatever you told me, and you were very kind, whatever you told me was going to be the future. I typically just, rolled with it. I can tell you that incredible times with both of those guys, and Chuck to this day still. A plastic surgeon needs to remove his smile every time you call him Vin Scully. And then it was your idea to have him with his unbelievable career, be able to number each and every broadcast. And that was your idea. Might have even been the three of us on the golf course when you came up with that with Vin. I would say Vin Scully, though, probably dresses a little bit better than Chuck, doesn't he?
Quite a bit better. But when I talked about him being Vin Scully, I mean, I really thought that Chuck Caton would be the play-by-play guy into his 80s or however long Vin Scully worked. And that was my reference, that he is, did such good work and was so entrenched in the growth of the Hurricanes. I really thought he'd be there forever.
I can tell you that because he and I remain unbelievably close to this day. I can remember the first time I met him at the We Love the Hurricanes breakfast when you and Pete hired me with no experience, and he had to be thinking, who the heck is this guy? And he welcomed me and proved that age is only a number with regards to friendship right from the get-go. It's probably led to a tough cigar habit, but I'll take my chances.
You had all the experience in the world. You knew how to talk.
yeah. And I'm not sure a lot of women would agree with that. Jim, as we close, and for the people watching on YouTube and listening, Jim Rutherford was when my dad was alive, dear friend. He used to Jim go into my dad's Ford authorized remanufacturer golf days, and Jim would go in Leftyville and win. Did you win that tournament, my dad's tournament, all the time?
Not all the time, but I won it once, and I was close a couple of times. It was one of the great days of the year, though. I mean, what he put on there, the prizes and the food and everything. We used to play it at Pine Lake in Detroit, and it was a great event. We had a lot of fun.
And my mom, she could always get away with asking you questions. I remember she and maybe Eric Stahl and I were having coffee in New York, and we had all road games. And I mean, I think they were 4 or 5 games above 500. And, first thing she says is, Jim, what's up with the power play? She's one of the few people that could probably get away with asking you that. Two things, before we go. First, on the hockey front, two of your closest friends, one reported to you, Paul Maurice, on a couple of different occasions. And boy, he's still proven what an outstanding coach he is, doing an outstanding job in Winnipeg. And then you reporting to Pete Carmanis. What is that like, when you, are in a professional situation, manager with a coach, your coach and then your owner, being able to, I don't think massage is the right word, but knowing the reality that you have phenomenal, close friendships in play?
Well, the friendship part of it made it easier because you got to know the person a lot more, and you knew when and when not to approach certain things and say things. But as far as friendship, when we were doing our job or we were having meetings, there was no friendship. Okay, we were dealing strictly with business and making our points, and then when we had the opportunity to go out to dinner between games or in the off season, we kind of let work go to the side, and the friendship was very strong. But you're right; those are two guys in my lifetime, in my career, that I was very close to.
They were both. I'm trying to think if Mo was there. I know Pete was there. I have to finish. Boy, you dug in. And I just can't tell you what a great wedding it was. My dear friend, your wife, Leslie, you have a beautiful, you have the most well-behaved, good looking, boy, he's going to break a lot of hearts, your son, James. But Leslie, who wants one of these digging in hats, I'm going to get it for her in Pittsburgh colors. She is a culinary. I'm looking at everything she's cooking during the pandemic. I'm surprised. You look great. I'm surprised you don't look, like you've been to, Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Can you speak about Leslie? Because I remember when you guys first started dating, being at your wedding, and being at you just celebrated Canadian Thanksgiving, one of my favorite American Thanksgivings. I dug in at your house. Of course, it was one of the great spreads ever, and the role of Leslie in your life, because boy, am I privileged to call her a friend.
Well, she's played a great role in my life, and certainly you're talking about her cooking. She made a little turkey for just the three of us the other day. Of course, for all of the families that celebrate Canadian Thanksgiving, those gatherings were much smaller this year because of what we're going through. But yeah, her hobby is cooking, and I'm a very lucky guy, and she cooks gluten-free, so that's been fortunate. And then on top of that, you've noticed that I haven't gained weight. I've actually lost a little bit. I've been walking 5-6 miles a day. We both do because we have that extra time to do it. So health-wise, that's been good. But this has been a tough goal because I'm in the high-risk group with COVID, and we've pretty much been locked down. And to do that with just a couple of people, it's hard. But I'm very fortunate. Leslie's handled it extremely well. And my son James he's homeschooling now. Fortnite has been good for him because he can play his video games after school and still have communication with his friends. And so that's been good. But this COVID and lockdown for people that are high risk like me can get very difficult. And I'm fortunate to have a great family.
I'm very happy and grateful that you're safe and healthy. Meanwhile, if you come down here, I'm at an ATH, an all-time high. I might have to move in and have some of that gluten-free because, Jim, I have a bet. Did you see the picture of Brenda Moore there in the bubble, chiseled at 50? So I said the Canes were down to the Boston Bruins in one of the games. I said, they come back. I'll make you a promise, Hurricanes fans. I'll get as ripped as Rod. Let me tell you, I got a long ways to go.
Yeah, everybody does. Everybody does.
Oh, thank you, Party. Do you have anything for me before we say bon voyage?
No, just make sure you give your mom a big hug. One of my favorite people. And thanks for your friendship, Tripp. Good luck to you.
I love you, Jim. Thanks for digging in with me. And tell Leslie the Pittsburgh Dawn cap is on the way for the kitchen.
Make sure you send an extra couple, one for my son and one for me.
Consider it done. On the way. Well, Admiral, that was a fun one. By the way, here on YouTube, you selected the color schemes on these hats. This one really pops. Digintripp.com for the merchandise. This one, for those watching on YouTube, is beyond sharp. So let's hope the questions you have for me are equally sharp.
Let's hope. From your career as a goaltender, what regrets do you have?
Oh. Well, I can say, and I'm not sure exactly where this happened. I think it happened somewhere in college and it's a fine line, where you go from expecting to win to hoping to win. And along those same lines, expecting to make the big save on the big stage and wanting that big moment, say in overtime, to unfortunately being on the wrong side of it and not wanting to give up a soft goal that's going to cost your team, wondering if you'll deliver the goods, and hope's not a strategy. And somewhere along the line, I lost that. That's where I've always known, at least in broadcasting, I've never lacked, however you feel, I've never lacked that confidence. And the one thing that I would point to as with regards to regret be after my freshman year at Hartford, I was right there in the top of the country in goals against and save percentage as a freshman. And I elected to go to this San Jose Shark affiliated Brainerd camp in Minnesota, which was a great camp, but it didn't really specialize in goaltending. And I had always gone to a farm outside of Toronto. And a guy named Dave Tatarn, former National Hockey Leaguer, had really maximized my potential by really making you put yourself in position to get hit, not reacting and guessing. And I went away from Dave that summer. Dave, some of his best products include Ryan Miller, former Hurricane Curtis McElhaney, just to name a few. Some really good goaltenders. And I did it with the right intention to try to avoid a sophomore slump. But looking back, I went from being a smaller guy that played big by playing the percentages and putting myself in position to get hit, to becoming a reflex, guessing type goaltender. And I never got that back. So I guess that would be my biggest regret, that I changed what had been a working formula for me between my freshman and my sophomore year in college.
That's interesting stuff. Moving on to your broadcast career, when did you know you wanted to be a broadcaster?
Well, the old line, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan. So my plan was to play, 15, 20 years in the National Hockey League, and then hopefully slide right into a broadcasting job, because I always thought, like Jim Rutherford said during the podcast today that, you know, you've always been able to talk. So it was something I was always interested in. But after my second year, you know, in the minors, that, you know, I had a cup of coffee that I did, you know, in the NHL. It was then that I elected Admiral to move into some form of broadcasting, whether it be in news or sports. And I was lucky enough to get an internship right after I called it a day. And the reason I called it a day is because I looked at it. I didn't really move up on the depth chart in terms of being the true call-up guy, so the third guy in the system, which I thought I would have needed to be to really progress in my career at that point. I had a Harvard degree. I've often wondered if I should have dug in a little bit more. But as I mentioned in the previous question, I had already lost that X factor of expectation of winning, of delivering the goods. So I decided to call it a day, having been able to put on an NHL jersey, albeit briefly. And then I got an internship at CNN in Atlanta. And I went to move down there, and I was just a production assistant, where helping out the anchors. And eventually I would have been able to put together my own reel, and I either would have gone to a small market, maybe in sports or maybe even news. And it was right at that point, maybe 30 days of living in Atlanta, that Bill Gardner, who was working with John Forsland at the time, ties to the Chicago Blackhawks, took a vacant color analyst position with Chicago. And so I reached out to the Carolina Hurricanes and asked, you know, I don't have any experience. I had done a couple of things with regards to broadcasting in the minors when I wasn't playing. And Jim Rutherford was influential, and the most influential person by 100 country miles was Pete Carmanis. That, you know, the team was in Greensboro, so you were still building a foundation. I think he thought I had potential, and so he took a chance, and a huge one, a colossal one, that he gave me the job with no experience. And that wasn't the first time that Pete had been there for me. When the Flyers didn't sign me, I thought he was very instrumental, along with Jim Rutherford, getting me a tryout with the Hartford Whalers, and he even helped me in junior hockey before college, when I was in a bit of a rut. So I always knew I wanted to do it, but the reason that it was expedited in the way that it was because of Pete Carmanis. And that's why it was really meaningful a couple of years ago when the Winnipeg Jets, Adam, were in Raleigh to play. Paul Maurice also goes way back with Pete Carmanis, and he and I were having dinner, Paul and I, the night before the game, and Pete sent us a text how proud he was of both of us and where we're at. So that makes me feel good that Pete thought it was a big chance that he is happy he took. Well, that was a lot of fun. New Country Auto Group allowed us to dig in with Jim Rutherford, and thank you once again for their continued support, as we will be with them for the foreseeable future. They've been very, very loyal. And if you want loyalty, you want excellence, you need a premier automotive experience with regards to buying a car, servicing a car, all sorts of brands. It is New Country in New York, in Connecticut, in Maryland, in Pennsylvania, in Florida, BMW, Ferrari, Mercedes, Maserati, Smart Car, list goes on and on. newcountry.com. Thank you so much once again for digging in. Please, let me reach out and try to touch you from the standpoint of rating and reviewing our podcast on all platforms, audio. Let us know where we're at, how we can get better. YouTube, same thing. Ask any and every question. As we've done on this show, we will answer selected questions, and we will do that consistently and regularly. We want this to be an interactive experience, and if you don't tell us, we don't know how we can continue to strive to be better for you. So please do that. Until the next time, look forward to digging in with you, and will you please dig in all facets of life in the meantime.
We're digging in with Tripp today, yeah. Today, yeah. Today. yeah. Today,